Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. I am Omar Kniao, Professor of Applied Mathematics and Computational Science, Chair of the 2018 Enrichment Programs. It is my privilege to call on Professor Jim Calvin, Vice President for Academic Affairs, to give a welcome address.
Thank you, Omar. I think a welcome address may be a rather bold description about what I'm about to do, but I do want to say welcome to everybody for this opening keynote address in the Spring Enrichment Program. I think the enrichment programs are remarkable, and I think they're remarkable because they're built by the community. One of the smartest things I've done in overseeing the enrichment program is to stay out of everybody's way. The program is built because the community identifies important topics and identifies significant speakers from around the world that can influence how we think about these problems. And this event this week and tonight's speaker is certainly an example of the brilliance of the community in identifying people who should be able to influence us in all we think about when we think about the various topics that we discuss. Of course, the program itself deserves a lot of credit for a lot of people in general, but in particular, I think I'd like to recognize Omar Kniao, who has generously given an inordinate amount of his time to the efforts this year, and Marie-Laure Boulot, who runs the enrichment programs on an annual basis. So thank you to both of you. One of the goals of the enrichment programs is to bring together people in unusual ways to be able to benefit from dialogues that they might not normally have because their daily routine limits the interactions they have. And the most globally significant impact of that I can think of is I had lunch today with our keynote speaker and another colleague from MIT whose office shares a wall with today's speaker, and they say the only time they talk is when they're in Saudi Arabia. And so I think that that's a sign that we all should take an opportunity every once in a while to lift our head up and look at the amazing people that make up our community and benefit from the unique perspectives each of them can give us. But none of them are going to be able to compare, I think, to what we're going to learn tonight about great cities. So thank you all for attending.
Before I call on my colleague and friend Jeff Shama to introduce tonight's speaker, I have been asked to remind you that in this incarnation of the Spring Enrichment Program, we have started a Twitter competition that specifically pertains to the keynote lectures. Our hope is that this will help us in the dissemination and reach of these lectures, which, as you know, are broadcast and also placed on the web for future viewing. So please do participate in this year's Twitter competition. It is now my pleasure to call on Professor Jeff Shama to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Jim. Just to follow up on that point, I'd like to let you know that I do have a Twitter account, and I'm not just saying that because of the competition. So please be mindful of that. So welcome everyone to the kickoff keynote lecture of the Spring Enrichment Program on the City of the Future. I'm Jeff Shama. I'm a professor of electrical engineering here at KAUST. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Kamal Youcef-Toumi. Professor Youcef-Toumi is a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's a leading researcher in the areas of design, modeling, simulation, instrumentation, and control, with applications in the area of manufacturing, automation, and in particular, well known in applications in robotics. He's a recipient of various awards, including the National Science Foundation Presidential Young Investigator Award. He's a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. He serves on a variety of professional committees and advisory boards, but in particular, he's active here in the kingdom. He's the co-director of the KACST MIT Center for Complex Engineering Systems, and he's also the director of the Ibn Khaldun Fellowship Program, which is a very special program that sponsors opportunities for postdoctoral studies at MIT exclusively for Saudi women. On a personal note, I'd like to mention that Professor Kamal and I have a history of attending each other's lectures that goes back to the 80s. I was, in addition to being a professor at MIT, he was a graduate of MIT, and in fact, I attended his PhD defense. He didn't know me at the time, but I was there kind of taking notes and seeing how it goes. And he also attended my PhD defense, not as a secret admirer, but as a member of my committee, formally. Kamal, it's good to see you again. Let's continue our tradition. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kamal.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Jeff. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here with you today to participate in this important event. The topic that I'm going to speak about, the title is on the slide, how perhaps one can envision a great city, and focusing on the people, the public realm, and also the economic aspect of this. So these are maybe the 3 points that I wanted to go through them, and then hopefully link them together and making some suggestions perhaps during this talk. So I feel very fortunate and privileged to be at a place like MIT, and I had the opportunity not only to visit, but work with many companies and research centers and government agencies around the world, perhaps more than 40 countries. And these experiences were very important, that I learned a great deal from them. And of course, each one of these countries has aspects that distinguish it from the others. Japan was one of the first countries that I visited after the US. This was about maybe in the early 80s. And since then, I continue to work with on research and development projects with many of the Japanese companies. So the first thing that impressed me in Japan was the people. And I think for those of you who have visited there, you can see that they have a lot of essential things that deal with the aspects of life, like the kindness, the respect, the high level of discipline that they have. And they take a great pride in keeping everything clean everywhere you go. The punctuality, as you know, is also very high at every level. I missed a train, not missed a train, I got on the wrong train one time just because the trains, you know, they were not only very punctual, but very close in the timing, maybe less than a minute between them. So when I got to my station, Mr. Yamamoto and his team were waiting for me. So he greeted me and he said, "Oh, you made it and you are on time." I said, "Yes, I need to explain. I started about 2 hours before I was supposed to leave because I just wanted to make sure that I don't get on the wrong train," and then I did. So anyway, the second part about Japan is that their system and environment, right? It combines, you know, the traditional and the modern. They have also kept the old traditions alive in many parts of the country. And also a place where I think it is one of the places where every time I visit, you know, that I land and I'm in the airport and I feel very, you know, this safe and secure and a peace of mind. And this is even before I talk to anyone. And then after you talk to someone, whether it's an old person or a young person, a man or a woman, then you can feel even more at ease. And it seems that a very special type of feeling in an environment that projects all of the safety and the peace, even without people interacting with you. And so this is very, very important. Another aspect that is also very impressive is the Japanese efficiency in what they do. So if you want to see Japanese or efficiency at that level, maybe one can visit Japan. So it is really fascinating country. The other country that also maybe in this kind of story is Singapore, that I visited for the first time in the late 90s. This is part of a very important and major program of collaboration between MIT and Singapore. And so we were about 50 faculty members that started as part of this collaboration. It was called the Singapore MIT Alliance, and I participated in it for from the late 90s till 2016 or so. So a long period of time. So this is, as I said, the first phase of a long relationship with Singapore. And during that time, I visited many, many times and learned again a great deal. So there, I also was impressed first by the people, and then the environment and the country as a whole. It reminded me of a small Japan. So the difference is that there is a multiculturalism there, the people from different backgrounds, a great education system, especially for the children of Singapore. And the other aspect was the nation great determination and integrity for success. Some of the agencies that we have worked with from the government, from A-STAR to the Ministry of Industry and Ministry of Higher Education and other entities in the government, and then you can see the effectiveness of the government and also their great discipline in managing the country's economic affairs. So this is a very, I think, important part in my life, learning about this other aspect, which is different perhaps from the engineering that we do every day. And this is Singapore that imports its water, right? But at the same time, it uses, its talented and dedicated individuals to make Singapore an economic power. So this is, and it was at that time that I got interested in the socio-economic state of nations, and especially for the country of Algeria, where I am from, which is a country in a state of development. And I wanted to see that place of origin, to be, a great place, with great development and a great people. Like I think anybody would want to see that. And of course, to see how it becomes efficient and effective and peaceful, and also contributing, to the world. So that was Singapore, a combination with the long time leading to that from Japan. And so I started attending, meetings and reading quite a bit about this kind of aspect in the nation building, the competitiveness of companies and nations, effective ways of interaction between the public sector, the industry sector, and also the academic one. And also in the end, what makes regions and nations on a trajectory that of continuous progress. So this is, what you see here is Algiers. And this is the promenade, which is a very beautiful place, especially when on a sunny day somebody can take a walk. And the rest of the country, in fact, has many beautiful places like this. And so I was talking about the progress and the progress that will promote human well-being to support the humane behavior of people, and then supports technologies, particularly ones that are used in the infrastructure services, and at the same time providing opportunities for prosperity for not only individuals but also all entities that are dealing with the economic aspect of a country. And so allowing a community or a city or a nation to reach an advanced state of the humane social development, the cultural development, the technological development, and organizational. So this is part of a definition of a civilization. So civilization. So Margaret Mead, who was an American cultural anthropologist, was asked about civilization, or about the evidence of civilization. And so what she did is she answered that a human thigh bone with a healed fracture found in an archaeological site about 15 years ago, that is civilization to her. So to Margaret Mead, civilization is first about the people. People are the essential things for any activity or any project. If the people are not put at the center of that activity, then I think in the end the reward may not be at the highest level. So it is the people, what makes a community, what makes a city, and what makes not just a city, but a great city and a great environment, not just a place. These great environments where people interact, they support each other and they care about each other, not just the space that they are sharing, for maybe some odd purposes. So KAUST, I think, is a great example of this, where we have maybe more than 100 nationalities in this great institution. And why are you here, right? All of these people are here, they do research for education, and all of it in the end is for the betterment of mankind. So what is greater than that? So people is one aspect of this story. Economic impact, or the economic aspect, and also the environment. So I'll go to the environment for now, and these are the 3 points that I wanted to talk about. The environment also plays an important role. It affects the people, and the people affect the environment. So there was a ranking done by the Economist Intelligence Unit, and they looked at about maybe 140 cities, and they used 30 or so qualitative and quantitative factors that dealt with different aspects of stability, healthcare, culture, environment, education, infrastructure, and so on. So the top-ranked cities are listed here on the slide, and it turned out that they were just like maybe mid-sized cities that have maybe reasonable population. And then what was common also about these 10 cities, that they had a great public realm and a great balance between the socio-economic development and also this public realm. New York, London, and Paris, although they are leading hubs, in wealth and other recreational activities, were not on this list because of some issues with the transportation and other things. So what is the public realm? So public realm, people in the architecture and urban planning, define it that anything that matters to people, like the streets, the great spaces that they use, streets, parks, malls, squares. So this is the thing where people, or the spaces that people use in the end. And then these spaces that are accessible to people, and then they are allowing them to foster interaction between them, and in the end, enjoying life. So this is Bilbao, riverfront in northern Spain that you can see on the slide. Where would you like to live? There is the before slide on the left-hand side, and then the after renovation on the right-hand side, right? So the one on the left, what do you see? It looks like depressed, and maybe you can maybe even say sick. The one on the right, it looks healthy and vibrant and happy, right? So what happened there? So Bilbao was about like in the bottom of its economic state in the 80s. Unemployment was maybe about 25% or more, and then the population at that time was also at the highest level. And Alexander Garvin, who was the author of the book, What Makes a Great City, so he argues that this city, turned around not just because they put the Guggenheim museum there, but because of other things, right? And so these are, the other things was everything else that was done around the museum, right? And so these are, first of all, they cleaned up the river, they took all the pollution out, decontaminated it, they reconstructed, large areas along the river, they redeveloped, the port, they added a subway. What else did they do? Created like a promenade, about 8 kilometers long, and so then it turned everything around. So that was, so these are all the spaces that people use that play an important role in this case. And I agree with his conclusion that imagine that you put the museum, however fancy that building is, in the left picture, and everything around it still looks like that, right? Would that make sense? Doesn't make sense, right? And so this means that the cities can change, right, to become maybe more livable, right, for people. And then the cities can be planned from the beginning to be enjoyable, for people to live in, right? So this is Paris. I know we have a lot of people from France, and these are les grands boulevards, right? And so in the mid-19th century, they decided to make these very wide streets that you can see here. And these are the ones that define Paris. They have the uniform facades, they have balconies, they have the trees along these streets, right? And one of the reasons they did these wide avenues at that time to deal the congestion, actually, in the streets of Paris, right? And then at the same time, they wanted them also to be a means for leisure. People can go and walk and have fun there. So, and then Jane Jacobs, who's the author of the famous book, I think she published it in the early 60s, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she emphasizes in that book that cities should be designed to foster the interaction, between people. So not only in the modern cities, but this happened, in fact, even in ancient cities, if you look at those. So for example, you look at the Romans, also build, their cities in this way. And the ones that were planned in this specific way, they are still prosperous even today. And all of these cities, they have some public realm, right? And that is accessible, to almost everyone. These are colosseums that you can see. And this was also observed in East Asian countries. This is a painting from China. And it looks at one of their cities. Paintings are about maybe 100,000, but 1,000 years ago, right? And this is of the city of Hangzhou, right? And so they even, planned like the market and the street, and also the riverfront on the right-hand side. And all of these are part of this great realm or public realm for entertainment and business and other things. This is what it looks like today. Hangzhou. So this is the same city. It is rated as the most livable, or one of the most livable cities in China, and it also attracts major businesses, like Alibaba company has their headquarters there in Hangzhou. So if one does not have the right environment, then you have stress, right? And the stress can be very, very bad for everyone. And it starts from very, very simple things. You have a queue, and then you have people that are cutting the queue. That can cause stress. Maybe not at that time. If it doesn't happen then, later it starts, affecting people. And so this leads to the stress, and you have with it everything else that happens in terms of anxiety and perhaps other disorders. And if you have a population that is stressful, right, then in the end, your everything else, falls down, whether the productivity and the innovation and you name it, right? So this plays an important role in that way. This is New York City, Central Park. Imagine Manhattan without Central Park, right? Take all of this green space, take it out, right? Well, it would be, I think maybe it would be like a stressful place and maybe depressing. It would be like living in a forest of concrete, right? Concrete buildings. And so I don't want to live in an environment where you just have concrete buildings like that without any green space around it. And so, of course, the areas like around the Central Park, of course, are maybe at a higher prices, but this is a space where everybody goes, right? The land is limited, as you know, in Manhattan, not just limited, maybe very limited. And however, I don't think anybody would want to take this space and then turn it, for example, for other businesses or some other use. So the environment is playing an important role to gather the people together, in a city or in a community. But the environment by itself is not sufficient, right? So let's take a look at Ordos. This is another city in China. And there are many new cities, beautiful cities that were built like this. This area was redesigned and renamed Ordos in 2001. And Ordos means the palaces in the Mongolian language. It is located in the northern part of Beijing, not very far from there, but I'm guessing maybe an hour or a little bit more as a flight. And the construction of this whole city with everything in it, was done just in about 5 years. Yes, just 5 years, from 2004 till about 2005. And unfortunately, Ordos is a ghost city. Okay, there's nobody there. If you go there, there are no lights at night, no lights during the day. Nobody is using all of this infrastructure that has with bridges and new buildings and all of the necessities that you have, for a city, including landscaping. But it did not work. So the strategy or the economic strategy did not go according to plans, and then in the end, it was not appropriate for it to be sustained economically. So this is also some pictures from Ordos. And as I said, the environment was great, but then it didn't work out in the end. So one of the reasons is that the business was not diversified. Maybe this is one of the reasons. It was all resource business based on the iron ore and perhaps coal. And in the end, you have an empty city like this. This story, I think we have seen it maybe 2 or 3 years ago when the oil prices went down, right? They reached maybe $24 a barrel. And in fact, many of the countries whose income it depends mostly on the revenues of oil and or gas, we're in a situation like this. And so if we look at Silicon Valley is another different story here. So you have where an economy was built, and Silicon Valley started maybe around 1939, and the economy was built also to gain a competitive advantage in this case. And it went, the whole California, as you know, went from mining, gold mining and silver mining state to now becoming like a hub for maybe hundreds of billion-dollar companies. So if it is NEOM as a new region or new city or even an existing area, right, then they can too choose how to build up a competitive edge in that way. I'll come to this in a minute. So there are some economic opportunities. First one, perhaps in these areas, maybe they are too small to read on the screen. This is from a McKinsey report. They suggested about 12 potential technologies that can introduce maybe economic opportunities and perhaps even economic disruption. So some of these include the industrial intranet that combines mobile internet, automation of knowledge, the Internet of Things, cloud technologies. Another topic is in the advanced robotics, health with next generation genomics and healthcare in general. In the area of energy, storage is one area, and then of course the different types of renewables. So if we look just at the first topic, so you have, of course, I mentioned about the necessity for diversification, right? But then you can see the market size that are available for these topics. You can see you go maybe from 2 trillion to about 40 trillion, dollars. And so one can look into some of these areas to see where the opportunities could be. The other thing is the advanced maybe transportation systems. I think a lot of cities deal with this, whether they are electric cars, hybrids, or maybe new types of transportation systems, from the driverless to perhaps other types, right? And all of these, one can look into them on how they fit with this whole story about the environment, the business and the technologies, right? And then the people in there. So this is some of the work that we have been doing in this area of robotics. So here you have, let's say, a robot, let's say, looks at how I do something, and then it learns from me, and then it starts duplicating that. So in this case, I'm trying to get the cursor here. Oops, sorry. Where is it? Anyway, maybe I shouldn't. Something is going wrong. Give me a minute here. Sorry about this. Sorry, something went wrong. Where is the cursor? What happened? Sorry about this. Sorry about this issue. What? So this thing has frozen. This is the advanced technology that I'm talking about. What happened? Yeah, and the cursor has disappeared. Oh, I have it on the screen. Okay. All right, now I found it. Cool, thank you. I should have looked at the screen. Yeah, all right, so let me go back here. Thank you. Okay, so we should start now. Okay, so if you look here, this one is working. Yeah, so these are like purple, blue, red, and green. So they are in that order. You cannot, for example, remove the green before you take the red. They are kind of on top of each other. And so the robot can see you build this sequence, and then it tries to replicate that one. And you can see that sometimes it takes blocks from where the assembly has been made, and other times maybe from the back. And you can imagine this robot maybe can teach other robots, and then it says, I learned from Kamal, so we don't need Kamal anymore. And so it goes. So here you have many aspects. As this robot is moving, by the way, it has like many threads that are running in parallel, for the collision avoidance, for the path planning, and then the execution of a task like this one. Some other work that we have done with Singapore is making these stingrays, you can imagine using them for monitoring the waters for, let's say, fish and vegetation that is in the water, and then maybe getting information from those, the life in the water, can predict perhaps or learn from that, so you can see perhaps what other things might be happening in the future. And then these are other types of robots that are very small, that are all autonomous, right? That they can move into pipes and other confined environment. So you can see them here. This one has propellers inside in it, so that as it moves, it doesn't leave any turbulence. And if it hits, for example, a wall of a pipe or some other thing, then the propellers are not damaged. So these are some of these systems that we have been developing. So we talked a little bit about the people, importance of the people, the environment, and then what I want to identify now, maybe some of the key factors, that are perhaps necessary for economic impact. And these are, my humble opinion, okay, that they are necessary conditions. So a lot of the companies that I have talked to, and many of them in Southeast Asia, and then you ask the question, why did you come here, right? You came to this country, why not, some other place? And so they list these things that I summarized on the slide, that from the government point of view, they're stable, or they appear to be stable, and there is an efficiency in the governance. In the infrastructure, there is efficiency in the infrastructure. And this is like all the transportation, banking systems, telecommunications, ports, customs, the governance. So all of those can fall into that category. The other thing, that there is a justice system. There are rules, and rules are applied. Another important aspect to them was that there are skilled labor and there is talent, right? Taxes did not come on the list. They usually mention it at the very end. And these are all companies in many different industries. And so this is one aspect. Otherwise, what you could have is that people that are, or companies that are interested in sales. They come into sale, they make offices, and they will sell software, for example, or they make offices to sell service, or something like that. So, but the companies that are doing the research, development, and manufacturing, and so on, so they have some other requirements. And so here I underscore this first, the word efficient or efficiency. And this is perhaps summarized by Murdoch, okay, that maybe at some point there was perhaps the big that can beat the small, but he says that today it's the fast that can beat the slow. So it doesn't matter about your size and how much you have, right? If you're slow, you will lose. And so this speed is a very, very important criteria. If you have a chance to visit China, you will see this, as they call it, the China speed, or the Chinese speed, in making all kinds of projects and so on in a very, very short time. We've seen the city of Ordus that was built also in a very short time. Another point is the development and use of technologies. I think this is important so that people can get this experience in doing things, whether from the management point of view and from the technology aspect. And so here are some, these are a few projects that I selected from the KACST MIT Center for Complex Engineering Systems. And so here we developed methods for modeling and also tools for, as I said, methods and tools for design and modeling to manage and simulate these complex systems. You would want to do it like in an efficient way, and also to develop advanced, maybe human-computer interactions so that these models can be used for many aspects. For example, for monitoring or for planning, you can even maybe for prediction in dealing with these complex or large systems. So this is, for example, one of the projects is on using data, right, and estimating, like, for example, the flows of vehicles in terms of their origin, their destination, and looking at the different routes. This is all in, and by the way, all these projects are, some of them are at the city level, and then other ones are at the kingdom level. And look at this information, also collecting all this data and processing it from, in fact, from mobile activity as a function of looking at the towers, right? The tower locations, and then as these vehicles are moving and people are using their cell phones, so that data is computed or gathered in that way and used. So this one, for example, looks at other different aspects. You have the transportation. On this side, you have religion. These are from Twitter data, right? And this is entertainment. So you can see a peak here. Probably there was a soccer game or something that was happening, and then people talk about such a thing. This is another thing on the Twitter data, and looking at for the pedestrians and also for cars, and to visualize this information, you can zoom in into different areas and see all these activities in that way. Another one, I think I talked about this one, and this is on, let's say, having a desktop system for human-computer interactions, and then you could use it, for, let's say, you move some pieces, and then you can see the effect of what those changes, can have on this. So creating all these visual things can be very, very important. And also, if you make this one like easy to use, so that the users can have all different kinds of backgrounds, they don't have to be trained in a certain area, right? That they can use it and communicate and make decisions in that way. So these are, there is also a website on the KACST site, right? And then you can look at different aspects or different information in real time regarding Riyadh. I think this one is for the Riyadh city. Another aspect is discipline. I think in building these communities, many times we forget about how we are interacting with each other. And discipline is a very, very important aspect. So whether you look at a small team or an institution, or perhaps even not perhaps, or a nation, right? If the members, or let's say the majority of the members in that society do not have discipline, right, then that nation or that city will not go far. They may be spending maybe more money, more effort in doing things, but then the return may not be at that level. And Lee Kuan Yew, as you know, in Singapore has emphasized, this aspect of discipline in an important way. In the tradition, the Islamic tradition, as you know, in the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, okay, that in his kingdom, you can read about the discipline that he had in, and it was actually a very, very, maybe at the highest level of discipline in that kingdom. In one of my stays in Singapore, I took this picture that is on the right-hand side. This is a picture of people in one of the metro stations just going up, right? So what attracted my attention is that all these people are on the left-hand side, right? And I stayed there for like about half an hour taking pictures. The trains come, people come down, other people go up, and it was like over and over in the same way. To me, this was like one part of this, the discipline in training, how they stand, how they move, maybe perhaps in this way. Even in the metro, I didn't see anyone like using the phone and talking very loud, for example. So these are maybe things that are done in a very natural way, perhaps. Maybe you have heard about Skynet. This is now implemented in China. And so they have about 170 million cameras. These are all outside, and they are taking pictures. And then each person is recognized by these vision systems, and then they can give you a rating, right? And so somebody crosses the street when they're not supposed to, and they're caught on the camera, so your rating will go down, right? You do something else, your rating will go down. So in the US, there is the credit rating. So somebody who is not paying their bills, on time or things of that sort, then there is a credit rating. So when that person goes to buy a car or buy a house, then they check the credit rating. If the credit rating is not good, then they will either not give credit to that person, or if they decide to do, then they will the fees and the interest and so on will be like much, much higher than for a person who has great rating. So there was on the news someone who was in China and could not purchase a plane ticket and could not purchase also a train ticket and so on, because everywhere he goes, he comes up on the system that he's not a good citizen, right? And so now you have to figure out how to go back and fix, that rating. So Professor Omar was saying at lunch that maybe the person goes back in front of the cameras and then walks straight and then don't, cross the street when he's not supposed to. Perhaps that will fix, maybe. This is what you suggested, right? Yeah. But anyway, I think the point of this one is that discipline is important, and in different countries or different communities, maybe one has a different way of implementing that, and then so that you can get the discipline. The other aspect is the competitive advantage. So whether it's city or a nation, what is the competitiveness? Is it resource? Is it labor? Is it capital? Is it knowledge? Or is it a combination of these things, right? And so this has to be defined, for that instant of time, perhaps for a period of time, but then ready, for adapting because things change. And so if we look at for example, here I wrote the income, for Apple computers and for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? But you can replace, in fact, any other country here instead of Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, or any other country that is, oil and gas producing. And then you would see the per capita revenue about this much. So the numbers are not showing here, but there is a huge difference between the two. And then you can say, the person each person in that entity or in that community, we talk about how much they are bringing back in this way. And so this competitive advantage, I think, has to be clarified from the beginning, and then how it would be changed and adjusted as one proceeds in time. The other aspect is that balancing the workforce with these business areas. So if someone tells you that China, with 1 billion and half a billion people needs people, would that come as a surprise, or you say, well, that can't be? They have enough people there that should be okay. So this is an important aspect in terms of, as I said, choosing the industries or the activities of focus, and then making sure that the people that you have. So in fact, this thing about needing people is not just for China. If you look at the Southeast Asia, starting from South Korea to China to Japan, Taiwan, and then you can go all the way down to Thailand, right? So maybe 25, 30 years ago, these countries had people that were maybe with some adequate education, perhaps high school education, and maybe some other kind of training, and they were able to work in the factories. So today, including China, you can find that young people are very, very well educated. They have bachelor's, master's, PhD degrees. And so then the pool of people that are available to work in some of these other factories and industries is very, very limited. Not only because of that, but also if you look at a lot of these governments have been promoting innovation and entrepreneurships and so on, and also dealing with their own existing companies. So the number of companies increased, right? And then that other pool of available people will be reduced. And then the other thing is that the products, in terms of their quality and standards, have increased quite a bit. And so in this case, there is this issue of doing things, in a concise way, not just concise, but maybe coordinated way between the people, the availability of the. In fact, in one of the projects that we have with KACST is to talk about the labor, so that you can have, maybe with a click of a button, you can have all the information about the people in Saudi Arabia, their skills, their training, all of that information, and then you can match with all of the industries that are present now and perhaps the ones that are coming in the near future or perhaps in the distant future, and to do the mapping in that way. And this one, yeah. So another important point is the change and adaptation. Sorry that this slide is white like this, but I can at least reduce the illumination in this way. Changing and adapting, another important thing, whether it's for a person, right? So if we don't, adapt ourselves and learn new things and continue, we can become irrelevant, very quickly. Technologies and other things are moving very, very fast. This is Singapore. You can see that in the 60s, they were labor intensive. 70s, they switched to skills. And then in the 80s, capital, and then technology. And then after that comes to knowledge base, right? And then, so you can imagine if they took maybe one strategy and they stuck with that one strategy, most likely Singapore would not be what it is today. This is from the chairman of the board and president and CEO of Black & Decker company. So he was talking about his company and then other companies in the same industry. And he says that in their case, if they don't reinvent and restructure and themselves maybe change every 5 years, okay, then they will be eliminated, right? So this is, I think, another important aspect in all of this planning that one is is doing. And now, we go back, to this story about the 3 elements, as I talked about, each one of them maybe a little bit, perhaps maybe identifying some key factors for the economic impact. I think those ones I talked about. And then perhaps I come back to Margaret Mead, right? So that she was asked about the civilization, and she answered in that one sentence, it was a human thigh bone with a healed fracture, and this was found in an archaeological site 15 years ago. So she's pointing out to this person who was injured, and this particular fracture that was in this thigh bone perhaps was lethal. Some of these fractures can take maybe a few weeks to a few months, to heal. And then she continues to, one can understand maybe from what she's saying or from what she said, that at that time, if there weren't people around this person, he or she, right, to take care of him, to maybe feed him, to protect him and care and so on, so that person would have died. And so in her view, that civilization is this, when people get to that level of caring and so on about each other, then everything else, is important. But if we don't have this aspect, then we are not civilized. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and thank you so much. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just here to direct traffic.
Okay, sure. Yeah. They said you can throw that, yeah.
Yes.
I tell you, when Mark told me that I can throw the microphone yesterday, I thought of this one. I came to check that this thing is working, and then I said, did he really mean this? I wouldn't throw it anyway. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Don't you agree with me that too much joy and beauty in the city of future can be disturbing for the people and the economy? And my question here is how to avoid, if we have in mind to build a smart city, how to avoid getting into the trap of ending up with a fancy city, not a smart city?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the question. Smart city versus a fancy city. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think in taking maybe some of the things that I talked about, perhaps there are other things that I don't know, but there are certain things that can be done so that, yes, people can enjoy themselves, and there is a limit to that. Limit in a sense, people will be reasonable, right? People have to work, they have to be productive, they have to prosper and then enjoy everything. Or maybe from the beginning they are enjoying things. And so I think in the end, it becomes like a balance, and people learn how to balance, how much time they spend at work and how much time they are spending for entertainment and so on. But we know that even today, whether we have smart cities or fancy cities, there are people who are spending a lot more time on, I don't know, some of these things, on the internet, and that may not be good for them or wasting time. But in the end, as I was trying to talk about, like the example of Singapore, I mean, to me, I was very, very impressed with that, because the city is beautiful. And then you have all of these entertainment things, and outside you can walk, you can ride, their metro, you can. So, and it is maybe, how shall I say this, things that are complementing each other. I agree that if one is focusing just to have a fancy city, meaning like nice buildings and nice parks and so on, and I gave the examples of places where they missed the other things, then in the end it cannot be as at the level that you want. Yeah.
Thank you for your remarks. I've been thinking a little bit about this, and I think about this, maybe it's an environment or a master planning question, but the rule of thumb in restaurants is, where do you put a restaurant? If you're going to build a new restaurant, you put it next to another restaurant, because density matters. And creating an attracting force by taking advantage of the environment around you is important. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering about your feeling about the role of creating density in this master planning. It certainly was demonstrated in Silicon Valley mm-hmm. and in Singapore, and how central density was in terms of creating the cultural environment mm-hmm. around which you try to build great cities.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. Having things that are accessible is important. In Singapore, I think they did that. I think they called them town centers. So you imagine, the whole space, and then you have areas where you can walk to almost anything. You can come out of your house, you can walk maybe to a cafe or a restaurant, and it is designed that way. In contrast, if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, and so you have from the economy side, it's doing fine, right? But then from other side, perhaps it doesn't, if you had to do a rating. So first of all, the diversity there is maybe on the low side. I have, in fact, one of my doctoral students who finished, and he's there for maybe 3 years or so. So one thing he said is that if you want to marry, to have a husband or a wife that is an engineer, and then your kids to hang around with engineers, and your neighbors are engineers, and the companies all around you are engineering companies, then maybe Silicon Valley is for you. However, he said he has to drive everywhere he has to go. That's the life is not that you can come out and walk. So there are different things, but I think from what I have read and interviewed actually quite few people, in every meeting, from the time when Omar talked to me, right? At every meeting, at the end, I take a few minutes and I ask a question, in the city, if everything is possible, what would you like to have, right? So nobody mentioned anything about the technology or the buildings or anything like that. They talked about, that they can walk, they can bike, that they can, things that are close by, that there is maybe the transportation system that is there. And then almost everyone talked about what you just mentioned about having things, like close by. So I think that in the design of these cities, or even existing cities, and how you can perhaps revitalize them, to take these things into account.
Thank you, Dr. Youcef, for your speech today and yesterday, the interview. You described the value of people in such cities. And now I'm wondering, the composition of these type of cities, will that be artificial, as in people are applying to live here, or is it open to everyone? And secondly, could we expect to see similar socioeconomic, like class structures in cities of the future?
Yeah. I'm not sure that I can answer that question, but I think, in the end, people have to be, how shall I say this? It's like a free place, right? Free in a sense that people can come and then not only live there, contribute, learn, contribute, right? And so And so if we say, for example, one says only engineers or only medical doctors can come, then I don't know what kind of city that would be. However, I think in the end, the city has diversity in it. Diversity in maybe the backgrounds of people, diversity maybe in the areas of expertise. You have maybe medical, you have engineering, you have other things. So I think that diversity helps and promotes many other important things in that way. So yeah, I mean, like today, I mean, one can go to almost any place. People don't look at, oh, you're an engineer, so maybe you should go to this other country and don't come here. Yeah, but as I said, in the end, in terms of the planning, right, you have businesses that you want to start, and so then you need to have those people. And so in some of the countries, they can, that I have worked with, they can plan maybe 15 or more years into the future, and they can see, oh, we need this many nurses, we need this many medical doctors. They have projections in terms of the multinationals that are planning to move in that area. So then they look also at what kind of technical people that they have now and the ones that they need. So this is all part of that, yeah.
Hi. Thank you, Professor, for the talk.
Thank you.
I have to say thank you for nicely representing Algeria.
Thank you.
And since you're familiar with Algeria, my question is going to be quite specific.
Please.
First of all, do you see something like this happening in such a country? And second of all, as a simple citizen without any higher authority, how can we contribute to make such places exist in such countries, or at least make it better over there? Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe I can respond by a story. I think I was trying to say maybe today at lunch. So the answer, I think it's possible. You just need people that have the will, to change things, right? And the story was in Singapore. So the famous economist, Friedman, came from Chicago to Singapore. This may be like around 1963 or so. And then, so he was asking about, what is your plan? So Singapore at that time was like maybe, like if you compare to what it is now, is like maybe, in terms of the people, number of people is low. There is no plan, no nothing. So the person, I think, that was in charge of the economic board, or trying to remember him, so he said, we don't have. Basically, he didn't have, the plan. He didn't have the strategy. He didn't have anything, right? But he said, we have people that are determined, to succeed. So if you have that, then you will succeed, because you can find the solutions. And there are examples of that, of countries that have no resources and so on, but they have people that they love their people, they love their country, and they do the right thing, to see it succeed. Yeah, Singapore, I think, one of the great examples of that. Yeah, so I think in the end it's possible. Yes, thank you.
All right. As much as I would love to continue the discussion, and we'll probably continue the discussion as we are making our transits to later on tonight, and hopefully later on we'll keep the dialogue open tonight.
Sure.
I think it's a good time to stop on this note, and let us show another round of appreciation for Professor Kamal Youcef-Toumi for a wonderful lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.